Hi, I'm Beck and welcome to my review of The Atlas Complex by Olivia Blake. I'm going to be talking non-spoilers, and then because I want to give my full thoughts with context, I'll talk about spoilers at the end, but I will clearly flag when the switch happens, so if you haven't read this yet, you are still safe to watch this video. In this final installment, power is taken, only the extraordinary are chosen, and only the cunning survive. In this final installment, the initiates have to deal with a deadly bargain, while one of the key characters may succeed in their potentially world-ending plans. It's a race to survive as they are faced with the question, who or what are they willing to betray for limitless power, and who or what will be destroyed along the way. And this might shock you because I've given the other books 4.5 and 4 stars in this series, but this installment was sadly a disappointment and I gave it a 2-star rating. And the reason that my rating dropped so significantly in this installment was because it felt like the themes in this final book really overtook the development and the intent of the characters. And what I mean by this is that world-ending plan and this power which is accessible by betrayal, while it was somewhat in a sense literal, it was also such a thematic message that was muddied a lot along the way with all of the different perspectives that really just showed a lot of information, but then not a lot of acting on that information. So it made the book feel passive and not energized with choice, which took a lot of the agency out of the characters for me, and it made it very boring to constantly read, and I found I skimmed a lot of information because I didn't want to take it all in. It was also quite tiresome to read about characters that are talking almost around this point that might become the end of the world as they know it, but for an academic standpoint, they are interested in different sections of this knowledge. Maybe just say that and take ownership of that action, because if you're moving towards it anyway peripherally, like, it was again so much agency taken out of the book because no one was actually doing anything. They were all just talking about it, and there needs to be a point in a story, especially with characters that we've got 2 books of build up already, like interact and then make a plan and do something about it. Don't just be talking heads all the time and get stuck in the books, which makes sense for the themes of power and research and access to knowledge and how that is a privileged thing to have. Like, I get that, but also make the characters do something, please. I go on to say that there was a lot of academic description, obviously. There was a lot of self-flagellation and the characters just getting stuck in their circles. There was a bunch of different conversations ongoing, and I found all of it just not very fulfilling because it feels like it was almost undermining the characters that had been developed in the past 2 books. I was like, what are you talking about? What are you doing? Nothing. And that made the plot and the pacing kind of tiresome because at a certain point I was like, okay, why are we here? What is the point? These characters I don't care about anymore because they're doing stuff that is not actually relevant. In some cases, they're not actually doing anything at all. In some instances, sometimes the banter and the dialogue was clever and in the right tone, so it did get a smile out of me every now and then. So it wasn't all doom and gloom, but it just was not worth me reading 2 books to get to this point, if that makes sense. And I do want to talk now about spoilers because I feel like a lot of my gripes don't make too much sense unless you know who I'm talking about and what happened. So if you don't want to be spoiled by this book, now is the time to jump into the comments instead. Leave me a like if you're down there. But now I'm going to talk about spoilers, so brace yourselves. I just want to say that all of the characters in this book felt kind of pathetic, and I don't know if that was intentional or not, because if you're facing the world and all its power, you are just but a single cog in that entire mechanism of the world. So contextually, you don't really matter, quote unquote, but all of them just felt pathetic, which was a little too ridiculous. I'd also like to think of this book in general as having that flair for grandeur and not intending to be that self-deprecating, and yet somehow it kind of was, unfortunately. Specifically, Tristan and Callum's texting chain, while it was bantery and amusing at the start, it got really long in the tooth and just became very tiresome because if Tristan actively did not like talking to Callum, maybe just don't talk to him anymore. Like, why are you involved in the conversation? You walked away from your father who was a literal crime boss. You can walk away from this 20-something who's annoying. And then the ending where Tristan overthrew a billionaire and Callum died just felt really incongruous to what had already been developed for both of those characters. If you go back to just book 2, there's probably some trauma there that maybe can be salvaged, but this book just wrung them out so much compared to what had been done in the past. And it felt like these characters, even though they had an ending where there were so many different endings explored for them, ultimately the ending for them was just so disappointing. Like, why get Tristan's dad to shoot him in the head and then go through all these other endings and then be like, oh yeah, lol, Callum's still dead. By the way, Tristan took down a billionaire. What? And then going back to the characters that are useless. Raina, my goodness, I have never encountered such a useless character in any fiction I've ever read. Okay, at the beginning, she was going for politics and trying to change people's worldview and everything, but she just ultimately got so sidelined from the entire intent and the plot of this book. And I'm like, if you needed her physically present to look into that metaverse and maybe find if there are different versions of the world, like she's a battery, why aren't you bringing her back to that point? She's known that she is a conduit for power the entire 3-book series, and yet the plot made her completely just get sidelined. So I'm like, why is she even here? Why am I wasting my time reading about her? You know, she had this depressive state that she has not been able to snap out of the entire series. And then she comes to the end of the book and returns to the academic library and Parisa gives her a hug and then she cries. What is the point of her character? How ridiculous. I'm going to continue this tailspin while I'm on it because Libby's character growth is not even worth mentioning the fact that it's growth, because her killing Nico in this book was just the most stupid thing I've ever read. It's like she became an inverse of herself with killing Ezra at the end of the 2nd book and then obviously killing Atlas as well, which seemed like it was supposed to be a big secret, but 2 chapters in I was like, oh okay, so Libby killed Atlas. It wasn't very subtle and I don't know if it was intended to be subtle or not. Having Libby be the moral center of this group of initiates and then going full villain in the final book. This is what I mean when I say the themes overtook the characters, because for her to shift that much to the point where she is literally murdering people to further her own gain and the betterment of the universe, I'm like, that seems a bit of a stretch. She clearly doesn't want to be doing that, so why didn't she just say something when she especially went toe-to-toe with Parisa and she was on her moral high ground and then walked away from that conversation like, I need to take power for myself. Taking power doesn't mean killing your effectual other half. Like, come on. It's almost like there's been such a build up the past 2 books to which initiate will die that Olivia Blake was like, oh, someone I guess has to die in this book. Who does everyone like the most? I guess Nico is the golden retriever character, so everyone's going to suffer if he dies. Let's make Libby do it. It just seems such an off-the-handle decision. Why couldn't Raina die? She was basically useless anyway. And speaking of useless, Parisa was basically redundant in this book as well, when in the past 2 she's been so cunning and manipulative. It's like she just completely unraveled in this book unnecessarily. Like, she had pretty much most of her life together, except for her running from everything. And in making connections with the initiates, even though they weren't entirely healthy or loving connections, at least she was trying to find a center and a sense of self. And then all of a sudden she just went off the rails and was like, nobody loves me. It kind of makes power is taken an undermining statement in this case, like, ooh, her power was taken away because she couldn't be manipulative anymore, because suddenly she had feelings. Ultimately, settling on a 2-star rating after this time felt right, because when I finished this, I wanted to give it a 3.5 because it was so fresh in my mind. And I think I was trying to pull the wool over my eyes about all of the ways these characters really made me grit my teeth and took me ages to get through this narrative style. But I think 2 stars is correct because I'm clearly very salty about all of the character work in here, and I'm just ultimately so disappointed that I read 2 books of these characters and then it feels like it was so underdelivered in book 3. They all wanted to do Atlas's metaverse experiment without actually saying it out loud, which took a lot of the air out of the sails in terms of the intent of this plot. It seems ridiculous to me that none of them actually properly said what they wanted out loud, because as a reader, you can see the intent through experiencing their perspectives. So to not say it, it feels like you're missing out on something and it feels very thinly veiled. Why not say it, be clear about it, and then make the story not feel contrived? That's what I don't get. Anyway, I feel like I have rambled forever about this book and hopefully it was mostly cohesive. But if you've read this, let me know if it annoyed you as well, because there's just so much in here that I felt was unnecessary. This book was unnecessary. Someone please rewrite it so I can actually read a proper ending to this trilogy that I invested so much time in. I'm so disappointed in this, and it feels like I wasted my time rereading the first two to get to this book. I'm just so frustrated. But anyway, 2 stars. Let me know in the comments if you feel the same or different. Thank you so much for watching this review. I'll talk to you below in the comments, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.